All right.
Now I need to go to Zoom.
Yes. Yeah, you can go there and do that same thing. This is that classic, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Or we should practice this again a little earlier.
Well, you could, but what fun would that be? I mean, really, what fun would that be? Okay, listeners, welcome back for the second time.
Hello and welcome.
One-on-one live with Coach Blue and Athletic Director Marissa. For all you Patreon folks out there, thank you so much. We've read your names. That will be a part of the podcast that we will post tomorrow. So if you're in and out and you can't really, hang out with us because your boss will yell at you, this will be posted as a podcast tomorrow. So Max, thank you for working the board, dude. Max is a wizard behind that. Holy cow. Let us know if this audio sounds better. If not, then it's definitely something on your end. No, I'm just kidding. It's still probably our fault.
Problem.
But hey, we've been talking a lot about some moods and some interesting things with emotions and coping skills and stuff. And, there's been so much going on lately that we wanted to take some time to address some questions we've got about how to develop coping skills, how to develop emotional connection with yourself.
I think, why it's important.
Yeah. I think in addiction recovery, we have a hard time focusing on ourselves. As funny as that sounds, because we're still trying to repair outside damage, and so really this is a time that you've got to get very in tune with yourself. Even me, I've had a few things recently where I'm like, man, I'm getting headaches and this kind of stuff. I got to figure out what's going on. And I've had to spend a lot of time drilling down on what is causing some of this. Yeah. There is a book and a movie I absolutely love. But if you've ever been in therapy with me, you know that there's many times I will, give you this as homework. And it's a book by a guy who I think is an amazing writer, had some amazing experiences. It's called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior with Dan Millman. And It has a lot to do with getting centered, getting to know you, getting to understand your why. And right now we're approaching the massive holiday, right?
Yeah.
We get caught up in our heads so much. And there it is. Yeah. That's coming through the computer at times. That's strange. Mm-hmm. Let us know if you guys can hear any feedback out there in La La Land. But nonetheless, we really do want to focus a little bit on how do you get emotionally connected with yourself when you've spent years emotionally distancing yourself from those feelings and thoughts. Marissa's going to post a number up here soon that you'll be able to call in and be a guinea pig test subject to see if this is really going to work.
And I may need a break. Hold on.
Gotcha.
You keep going.
Man, we're batting 1,000 today. Holy cow. But let's start with talking a little bit about why this is such a intense season for emotions. You've just came out of the holiday of Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving may be kind of one of those holidays that you're like, let's just get through this so we can get to the big one. But emotions are already starting to ramp up high. If you're any kind of situation by where you ingest way too much media or news, chances are that you've got some feelings of what's the point? Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. You add that to maybe some situations where you can't exercise outside as much as you want to. You can't do the things that you've done during the summer months and the fall months because now it's colder and it's harder to get exercise in. And so you start kind of getting in a mindset of what's the point? What am I doing here? Now, you've heard of seasonal depressive disorder, also known as SAD, and it's a very real thing. And we just sent a newsletter out that had some information on that. I don't know if you've sent that out yet or not.
I haven't been able to get it.
But it is kind of covers some of the bases on that. But how athletes do you get in touch with your feelings? Now, this is a funny thing to talk about, especially with us alpha males, right? We're fine, rub some dirt on it and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
But here's I think maybe a side thought that you should probably identify. And that is how do you absolutely know how you're feeling? Do outside influences affect you? When something does come up, do you suppress it, push it away, or do you deal with it as it comes? If you're normal people, you don't. You don't do that at all. You try to suppress it and you try to hide from it and you hope it goes away. Last night, Marissa and I were watching a documentary on Netflix. It was called Take Your Pills. And it's about Xanax and benzodiazepines. And it was really interesting because, I thought about this for years and I've promoted this for years. That I think that substance, that drug is the devil's drug because it doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make you feel bad. It doesn't make you feel anything. It numbs you.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how since September 11th,
Hmm.
it has been exponentially kind of like prescribed to the point where, you were to use it no more than 30 days, because that would hopefully get you through the crisis stage.
Yeah.
But
so then you could learn to cope.
Yeah, but people started taking it long term.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if you take that kind of stuff long term? What do you think happens, Marissa? Like, what have you noticed with people that have these kind of like
Well, there's
problems?
a lot of issues long term, but one of them is that you don't learn to regularly cope with anxiety as it comes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ever do come off of it, the anxiety, the stressors, the triggers are even worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they were talking about this, like anxiety affects everyone in different ways, right? And sometimes feelings of fear or dread, they don't go away, they actually get worse.
Yeah.
And learning and understanding what anxiety is and what it isn't, and how to cope with that is kind of an important thing. That was awesome because anxiety's been around since the dawn of time. And it really is, to a certain degree, a good thing to have, because it's a self-preservation type mindset too. It's like, this could be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Or think about this, something that you're fearful of, or that you're kind of worried about, you're concerned, but then you face it and you get through it. What does that do to you?
Yeah. The overcoming, the being able to meet a challenge and face it gives you that self-esteem, that confidence you can do it again.
Yeah. So I've looked at it this way, that anxiety is kind of like your body's response to stress. And specifically, it's about stress or fear about what's coming.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a cool thing when you look at it too. So if you're struggling with anxiety, it's not about what went on yesterday. It's about what's coming. What's behind that door?
It's preparing for the future, which is a good thing. We need to have that. We talk about it often too, is, painkillers and pain. Pain is there to tell us something. Yeah. It's a sign, it's a trigger that we need to do something. If something hurts, put your hand on the stove, the pain is there to say, move your hand. And anxiety is the same way. It's there to tell us something, to be prepared and then work through it. Yeah. Or, hey, just so that we're aware of what's, we don't put ourselves in unsafe situations, things like that.
So when you face normal anxiety, job interview, new school, new job, family you haven't seen for a while, all these kind of things, normal things that cause a little bit of anxiety, it's a good thing because it heightens your awareness. But what happens is if you have it constantly, more than 6 months, for instance, right? Yeah. When you start having it all the time, taking a pill isn't going to solve the problem of what's creating the anxiety. It's going to take that feeling away. And I heard so many
fear
people,
is going to go.
Yeah. I heard so many people last night, they were saying, as soon as I took that pill, I was like over the moon. I was like, this is it. Mm-hmm. And then they take it consistently. And one guy, the poor guy, had taken it for his whole adult life. Yeah. And he was well into his 50s.
Yeah. And I think he started taking it like right into college.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anxiety disorders, it's more than just that normal feeling of anxiousness, right? It's more than just like, I'm nervous about this race or this event or this, new meeting or going to see this therapist for the first time. This is like, you cannot get it out of your head. A lot of this happens when people experience like trauma, like doom type situations, right? Yeah. Like, I'm afraid of flying, to the point where even thinking about getting on a plane brings these intense emotions.
Yeah. And usually that's from something that's previously happened and worried that it may happen again and trying to be prepared.
Now, it also puts a barrier between you and what you want to accomplish in life. There is a good thing that comes from overcoming some of that fear. And a lot of times what they've noticed is that the more they prescribed, the more problems people had. Yeah. And what they started to understand that we've kind of know is that the things that really kind of eliminate anxiety is your social network, the people you surround yourself with, the willingness you have to talk about where that dread, that fear that's creating that anxiety is coming from.
Yeah. Utilizing friends, family support to help you assess situations, to help you talk through situations, to even be able to have somebody to relate to. And they say, yeah, that's worrisome to me as well. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden helps you not feel as alone and helps decrease some of that anxiety.
Some of the types of anxiety disorders that I've seen, that I've worked with, are like things like panic disorders, right?
Mhm.
And panic disorders means that you're experiencing this reoccurring panic attack that kind of comes up at an unexpected time. Just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your heart starts to race. You start kind of getting that sweaty feeling. Your skin starts to burn, and you're like, "What's going on?" And it feels as though doom is right around the corner.
Yeah.
And there's phobias that create anxiety, things like OCDs and things of that nature. Social anxiety disorder I see quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
Mostly
like,
since COVID.
yeah,
Being home for a long time.
that's that kind of like fear or concern about being judged in a social situation. I think this is what's created. And Marissa, you've seen this. We've seen this. We've talked to the addicts fighting back who have a meeting. COVID has wrecked us as a community.
Yeah.
What have you noticed about our meetings and whatnot?
Well, and it's not just the recovery community. We've noticed it with church and other groups, just
Even
social.
public school.
Yeah, public school. Social situations are avoided a lot more. Like we have less people coming to church. We have less people coming to different like group events. Our addict athlete meetings aren't as highly attended now that numbers have gone down and things have opened. People just aren't as willing to go out. Some of it because they've just gotten used to being at home. And I think some of it is, there's a lot of things, but some of it I think is the social anxiety has increased.
What happens is it starts to placate to the I guess the mindset of ease. And what I mean by that is, we saw a lot of businesses that sprung up from COVID, things like Uber Eats, right?
Yeah.
And these home delivery systems. We just found out you could get home delivery from Costco if you order more than $50 worth.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what is this really for? Because convenience, yeah, but what are you doing with that time instead of? And so, like, it was interesting. Myself included, my daughter Brooklyn, we hate like ordering food from like a drive up. Now, because I'm fine doing it for myself, but if I have the whole clan of Robinsons behind me,
he goes into like
I do
full-blown panic attacks
because that poor soul on the other line, I'm sure, is just sweating bullets, like trying to get my order, and thinks that the Robinson clan's the biggest fools because they can't, decide on an order. That's what's going through my head. Really,
That's what
they don't
you're
care.
doing.
Yeah,
No.
exactly. But here's the deal. I start getting anxiety because I'm like, I'm going to sound like an idiot. I don't, what's going on? So I'm going to get someone the wrong thing. And I psych myself out for it.
Yeah.
It is the craziest thing. My daughter, Savannah, Marissa, no problem. There's like, boom, here it is.
Yep.
So,
if somebody changes, I say, just kidding. No Sprite. We want to.
How
Dr.
many of
Pepper.
you go to the self-checkout line rather than the one with the clerk? You're supposed to answer that.
Oh, you said you. I don't mind going to the one with the clerk at all. Sometimes, depending on what I have, I know it's faster to go to self-checkout, but it's not that I go to self-checkout to avoid interacting or talking to people.
Social anxiety is a lot more common than we think. And it happens quite often. It happens when people drive, freeway driving. People are always kind of worried about that next person. And so realistically, the only way to overcome some of these anxieties is to face them.
Yeah.
Now, how do you face something when you are sure that doom is, again, imminent? It's just right there, right?
Yeah.
Separation anxiety disorders. We see this a lot in children. And here's an interesting thing too. If you are the parent of a COVID baby, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be very aware that this is going to be a very real thing for you. And that is because that child's had mom and dad home for so long and had so much time and attention, and things have changed to the point where, there was so much unadulterated time that was being able to be expended on. When these kids now go to situations where mom and dad, caregiver aren't there, they're seeing some interesting things in the classroom. Social withdrawal, some isolation type things. It's kind of an interesting paradigm shift that we've seen, right?
Yeah. And I think
anxiety.
when we get to some of that, it reminds me there's a kind of a story. It's been going out for, I guess, for a while, in how buffaloes and what they do. Do you remember this story? In storms. So buffalo do not like storms.
They don't like getting wet.
They don't like getting wet. They don't like it cold. They don't. So what they do is they used to be able, they'd see the storm coming, they run away. And they started recognizing that as they would run, the storm and the clouds would catch up to them and then stick with them, depending on how fast they ran. And they learned that if they turned and faced the storm ran into it, they would get past it much quicker than running with the storm. Then they're going the same pace and the storm stays with them longer. And I've just loved hearing that story, because I think that's exactly what we need to recognize when we're talking about anxiety, that sometimes that storm, that cold, whatever it is, that adversity seems a little too much and overbearing for us. But if we turn and face it, we're going to get through it and past it.
Yeah.
Even though there may be times where it feels like it is suffocating and going to like kill you. But if you run through it, you're going to do much better.
And I want you to kind of point out the fact that they still get wet, even though they don't want to, they still get wet. But the beauty of it is you get wet, like
shorter periods
of time.
Yep.
But they still have to face the storm. And that's, I think, what happens is we run away from those things, but it's still lurking and lingering there. And if we don't get in the habit of facing those challenges and doing it with people that we know will support us and be there by our sides, that's when you start falling into some other kind of coping skills, substance abuse, isolation, like suicidal tendencies, those kind of things. The things that cause stress are kind of interesting, or cause anxiety are kind of interesting. Number one thing is stress.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone I know of is going through some kind of stress.
We all are. Everyone does.
Everyone does. And stress has a creepy little hormone that pumps out there called cortisol. And cortisol can do some pretty heavy damage, not just
in long bouts. Yeah,
absolutely. We're talking about physical body problems,
Mm-hmm.
medical issues like depression or illnesses can cause anxiety. Environmental concerns like do you have a place to be? I mean, are you on the verge of homelessness?
Shelter, food,
substance use and those kind of things. So there's a lot that cause it, but the goal here is to, if you're experiencing it, then how do you start to cope with it? Because taking medication, again, should not be for long periods of time.
Is it needed? Yes. Are we grateful it's there? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes it becomes so much of a crutch, or long-term, like you're saying, that it becomes detrimental.
Why do you think so many of us, Marissa, struggle with that concept of I can do hard things?
Because it's hard. Why do people want to do hard things?
Yeah.
It's much easier to do stuff that's easy and relax and lay in bed and watch TV, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think about that, and that's the obvious, but why? And I get that textbook answer, because it's hard. But really, why? I mean, it's interesting. If you see the evolution of some of these running events that we've had in the past, 20 years, we looked at these standard issue kind of runs, 5K, 10K, half marathon. Those things are big. Those things start getting hard.
Yeah.
Ultra marathons, really hard. But then we start getting things like Spartan races
Mm-hmm.
and adventure races, where it really does tax you emotionally, mentally, physically.
Yeah.
And what I kind of started to see is that, why do we recreate the tough when in life we have tough? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So we are engineered to be able to weather these kind of storms like the buffalo. But the problem is that we run away from them. I see people all the time that have a hard time advocating for themselves. They have a hard time defending, their selves in situations where they're in abuse, like experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is learned behavior. And the neat thing about behavior is if you've learned it, you can unlearn it.
Yep.
How important is that?
It's the key to everything. If it's something that you learned, it's something you can unlearn. And so people say, oh, well, that's just the way I am. There's not many things that just come from nature when you do nature and nurture. Most of who we are and what we are and who we become are a compilation of little events and little behaviors and little things that we practice and do over and over and over that end up becoming who we are. What is our personality? What do we do every day?
So in order to do these, you've got to develop a list of coping skills. And coping skills are kind of awesome, but they're pains in the butt because, again, it's not as easy as just taking a pill. These are things you have to actually physically do and be mentally aware enough to see it happening in order to change that trajectory. And that was interesting. This guy on this documentary we were watching last night had been on benzodiazepines his whole entire life.
Yeah.
And benzos, again, are one of the hardest drugs to detox from because the withdrawals can kill you.
Yeah.
That and alcohol, right? The two that can get you the most.
And people, or the medical community, has pushed forever that there's little to no addictive tendency or withdrawal.
Garbage.
And that's obviously, it's coming out as a lot of garbage, but We even talked to Dr. B about this on one of our older podcasts about what he is seeing more and more is, now I can't remember the exact term he called it, but it's like prolonged benzodiazepine withdrawal, and it taking years and years. And the guy on the show, he was talking about titrating down so much, and he wasn't even on a high dose by the time he was starting to come down, that he had to do it or it was going to physically kill him or, emotionally, because it was just too many emotions on top and not learning those coping skills as he started to come down.
And it got that
and
close
learning to feel.
And it got that close because he was saying one day he woke up and everything was intense. The kids, laughing and carrying on downstairs was intense. The smells were intense. Everything was so bad. He's like, I'm leaving. He jumped in his car and started taking off. He found himself
so tied up.
Found himself driving around the mountains. And he looked up and saw this cliff, 300-foot cliff. He's like, I'm gonna go throw myself off of that. Parks this car. He started to hike up to this place, fully intending on throwing himself off of it. And as he was climbing, he started having some awareness. What are my kids going to think? Well, this isn't me. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because he kind of just flew past this experience, but didn't realize the power and what he was actually doing.
Yeah.
For the first time in who knows how long, he was moving. He was doing something.
Yeah.
And it was enough for him to reset and ground himself to cope with what was going on, to say, there's got to be a better way. So instead of just sitting at home, wallowing in the anxiety, he actually did something.
Yeah.
And it was close.
Like you're saying, we've talked about this with the MDR, as he's walking and he's doing and he's looking for a place, sadly, to end his life, is when he started being able to have different connections, different thought patterns, and seeing, and then going, oh my gosh, I don't think he'd ever been suicidal before.
Never.
And was like, wow, is this? And he was finally connecting. I think this is tied to the benzos I'm taking. And oh my gosh, I don't want to be this person. This isn't what I want to do.
So he came back and he, talked to his wife about what happened.
Researching.
And he said, I think it's these. They went to 30 doctors. No one could figure it out. All the doctors assured him it wasn't.
Benzos don't have anything to do with suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
No.
Or all these physical ailments you're having, because he had all kinds of physical issues.
Yeah.
They found one doctor in England that had written a book about it. And sure enough, everything she had found in long-term use and helping people come off of those things listed every symptom he had.
Every single one of them. And he's like, wait a second.
But I thought it was interesting that his epiphany came after movement. Yeah. So as we talk about these essential coping skills, this is where I think, Marissa, you kind of shine, because you, having a degree in recreational therapy, it's funny because as we were sitting there watching this, we're looking at psychiatrists and therapists. The one thing no one has is recreational therapy.
Yep.
We have dumbed down that profession to the point where no one sees the value in it. And I'm telling you, if you go to a treatment center and they don't have a legitimate recreational therapist, don't go there.
Keep looking,
because they look at that as a throwaway thing, because, well, any mentor or any college kid or
somebody that likes rock climbing can do that.
They can't.
Not the same thing.
And they can pretend it is. Well, we're doing experiential therapy activities.
But
there's
some education, there's training that goes along with becoming a rec therapist, and being able to have assessments and have goals and be able to assess people and being able to put them in places that can push but not over push them to try new things and create positive coping skills.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but you get a lot of people that give feedback and they'll respond to this and be like, well, we have all this garbage. I'm sorry. That's my point of view. My understanding is if you don't have that, you're not a great program. And here's why. Every person that they did this study on, every person, and they covered it. It was so funny. You wouldn't catch it unless you're looking for it. Had some kind of physical involvement in their community, exercise
that helped them pull out of it.
That helped them pull out of it.
Yeah, the one was doing equine therapy, that she finally was able to get off some of her benzos and be able to deal with some of her anxiety, but was starting equine therapy and then starting to volunteer at the place that
the other gal was in the gym with a personal trainer, like learning to lift and to get strong. Every one of these people had some kind of physical attribute that they did as a replacement. I'm going to erase this and replace it with this. And it was so funny because
having purpose and passion.
They didn't linger on it very long, did they?
Yeah.
So coping skills, Marissa, what are they? What are the basic building blocks of a coping skill? Because there are negative coping skills and positive ones. If you're going to get in touch with what's causing the emotions, the anxiety, the fear, whatever,
Yeah.
how do we ground ourselves? Because, I think about when I talk about this, I want you to talk about the dog whisperer guy, Caesar, right?
Oh, yeah.
Caesar, what's his name? Caesar Milan?
Caesar Milan.
Yeah, Caesar Milan. If you've ever watched him, it's kind of funny because humans and canines are kind of alike sometimes.
Yeah.
What's a coping skill? What are these?
So coping skills are things you can do that can help relieve other issues. Sometimes it's diversional. Sometimes it just helps you think about something else. You need to do something to just get your mind off something else. The other part is being able to find things that bring you hope and passion and something that you really care about, that gives you a drive and a purpose. Like I said, the lady that was doing equine therapy, but then she started volunteering, and that gave her purpose. Not only the equine therapy that was helping her cope with some of the anxiety, but then a purpose and something bigger and further than herself. It also, it helps you do some grounding. It helps you connect your mind and body rather than just being stuck. Anxiety often gets very stuck in our mind. And then we have the physical ailments that go along with it, the heart racing, the heart beating, and, feeling overwhelmed and sweating. But to reconnect those in a safer, more positive way helps bring yourself to that center and together. I think a lot of people look at they think they often get too late into the process. It's by the time that they're in a corner in a ball going, I can't function, before they start trying something new. And that's okay. Just have something that can grab you, or a friend, somebody that can say, hey, let's get you out of here. Because sometimes I do it too. I've had times, I know what positive coping skills are. I know what I should be doing. But when I get overwhelmed or too stressed, I just get stuck, and you get stuck. And so at any point in time that something can come in, because it's like the hamster wheel, our mind gets stuck in that habitual negative pattern. And that's where, Caesar Milan talks about that with dogs. They'll get in that barking pattern, whether it's anxiety or somebody at the door, and they just bark, 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 bark. And what you have to do is just tap them, like do a physical tap. He always just taps them on the side, and it like breaks the brain pattern of what they're getting stuck in. And so it's the same thing, I think, with us. What is it, something that you can do that can give yourself like a shock or a tap to say, I need to do something else. I need to get my brain out of this stuck circle.
See, so listeners, it's what can you do physically? What can I physically do? And when's the now? So like, the cognitive coping skills, things like making gratitude lists.
Yeah.
I'm brainstorming solutions, being flexible, writing down goals. Now, the thing is, we'll tell you all these things. None of you will do this because it takes time. Yeah. Because it takes a little bit of effort. You got to find a pen, you got to find a pad, you got to type on your phone. You think this isn't really going to work. I guarantee you this stuff works. Write it down. One of the most beautiful things you can do in a situation like that is write it down. Write down the whole scenario, what you're feeling. And what happens is, that's another EMDR technique, is as you're writing, you're stimulating left and right brains. I wouldn't even type it.
The thoughts out of the mind, out onto the paper, and it's easier to let go.
We'll start telling you these things. Very few of you will do this because you want it to be easy. That takes effort. But remember, you have to do something. Homeboy had to get out of his car and start to hike to throw himself off of a cliff before he realized, hey, wait a minute, what am I doing?
Yeah.
He could have driven right off the cliff. That'd have been horrible.
Yeah.
But he got out. And he did something ever so slightly to change his mindset. Making lists of pros and cons.
And sometimes this sounds hokey. It sounds too, even you say it's hard, but some of these sound a little too easy too to work. And you think that's dumb. It's not going to work. Well, absolutely. If you think it's not going to work and you're not willing to try it, it won't work. So you have to be willing to try something.
Coping skills like tension releasers are kind of important too. This is why exercise and playing sports is so important. When you got pent up tension, whether it's from stress or anxiety, what have you, when you actively work it out, treadmill, outdoor running, hiking.
That's one of my favorite, like I would do relaxation classes for rec therapy with clients. And one of my favorite ones is a tension one, because instead of just sitting and like, okay, quietly, like think, relax your eyes, but you go through and I talk about tensing up different muscles in your body, because sometimes it's really difficult to just sit there and relax until you get in touch with the stress, the anxiety, and the tensions. So it's going through and it's like making a fist as tight as you can, until those muscles are just exhausted, and then they can relax.
Yeah.
And so that's a simple one too that you can do, where without going out and playing sports, you can lay in bed and do that, going through each of your muscles and like tightening them for a long count, 5 to 10 seconds until they're exhausted, and then being able to let go and relax.
Yeah. These tension exercises, things like, believe it or not, laughing. There are so many like comedies on like stand-up comedians and things, the things that make you laugh. Laughing is a huge one because that actually releases other kinds of chemicals in the brain that will flood that kind of stuff. But the physical stuff, I think, is the easiest to do, but hard for you guys to apply. Getting enough sleep is going to be huge. If you're not getting enough sleep, eating the right foods, eating enough of those foods, limiting caffeine. That's one thing I've had to do. As I started feeling like my body not doing what I wanted it to, I'm like, I wonder why my blood pressure is getting so high. The doctor's like,
sleep?
He's like, hey, Mr. ADHD, do you drink a lot of caffeine? I'm like, yeah, I do. He's like, you need to knock that stuff off. And it's been funny. I've limited massive amounts of that. Yeah. And 4 days later, I have no headaches, nothing. And it's so funny because it's like something so simple, but I thought there's got to be something more involved in that. But then that's also put me in a trajectory then to start eating better and start limiting sugars and all these other things. So these physical things are super important. Breathing. We're going to do hopefully a class here soon on breathing. Breathing is huge. Are you a mouth breather or are you a nose breather?
Yeah.
You might be amazed that if you have anxiety, I guarantee many of you are breathing through your mouth and you're not filling your lungs to the capacity. You're belly breathing and not,
or just shallow breathing into your lungs instead of deep breathing into your
absolutely
body. Yeah.
There are spiritual coping skills, and these things could be like service, going out in nature, attending religious experiences, service meetings,
prayer,
prayer, all that kind of stuff. So there are a ton of these, but they all take effort. And that's the hard part. One of the greatest things you can do is kick off your shoes and your socks and walk around barefoot.
Yeah. It's an awesome grounding.
I tell you, if you're having anxiety, take off your shoes and go out and check the mail with the snow on the ground. I guarantee you, the minute your foot hits that cold sidewalk, your anxiety is gone.
Cesar Millan, that's giving you a shock right there.
Absolutely.
And it's going to change your thinking.
Yeah. No, granted, obviously, you're going to go out there and your whole anxiety is going to change from like, I'm worried about this impending doom to
cold.
Holy crap, it's cold out here.
But sometimes just that shift helps you shift again and find something else.
And what it does is show you you're more in control of this than you think you are.
Yeah.
You have so much power with this, you guys. Again, I need you guys that are kind of falling in love with Addict to Athletes mindset here to know that you're not powerless over this stuff. You have the power and the authority to act.
Yeah.
And when you act, you have some amazing outcomes.
Well, I think it's important for people to realize too, that there are things maybe that you've grown up doing and they've always just been great coping skills. And then you try it as you get older and it just isn't working for you, that we change, our body adapts, our body changes, and maybe you need to try something else because those other things aren't working as well as they used to. So we always need to be open and flexible and not only trying new things, but also just trying things that didn't work before that may work now. Exactly. Some people go, well, I've done that before and I just don't, and I can't, I never sleep and I've tried everything to go to sleep. Sometimes it's going back and trying all the list again to see if it will help again.
What's funny about that too is my daughter Brooklyn, she unfortunately shares the same ADHD that I do.
It just went out.
Max. There it goes.
There we go.
All right.
My daughter Brooklyn and I, we have the same kind of ADHD issues. And she's like, I can't go to sleep at night. And I'm like, if you got up one day really, really early, that night you could sleep. She gave me this funny look and I'm like, maybe I better do that, because that was me kicking wisdom without being willing to do it.
Yeah.
So the last couple of days, I've like, okay, I got to get up and get going. And it does work.
Yeah.
I'm going to bed about an hour earlier now than I was.
And it may take a minute. Like some people think after 2 nights, no, I'm just more exhausted. Your body will sleep.
It will.
You may need to add in more things. Maybe you need to not only get up early, maybe you need to
walk more,
go exercise that day. You need to cut off, caffeine, early. Those weird things like, oh, only old people quit drinking caffeine at 5.
Yeah.
Maybe you're an old person now. You got to try it.
To accept that fact. So all of these things are being given to you so you can build a sense of resilience. And this is like you being able to build and boost your confidence. Remember, yeah, you can do hard things. We know this, but that confidence is that stuff in action. It's you being able to do it in real time. I do a lot of stuff that freaks me out because it freaks me out. Like accepting speaking engagements. Yeah, I like to talk, but I still get nervous. I still do those same things. Stretching myself out of my comfort zone, being able to be willing to do things that Marissa needs on her list that I'm like, well, that sounds like a job that's better for you. Like I don't want to have to go and talk to these people. Like today I had to go take the car and to get it looked at. And I'm like, it'd be so easy for you just to drop it off, Marissa. But I'm thinking, I've got to do this.
Do that.
I know. But it's those kind of things that like, and it sounds stupid and silly, but it's like doing things that you don't really want to do.
Yeah.
It develops resilience within you.
We get used to, yeah. And
Absolutely.
all of a sudden, whatever used to be different becomes the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always is changing and it always is morphing. And that's why you need to have some of that self-awareness of who I am, where I'm at, how my body, how I myself am reacting in these situations.
Absolutely. So, these are ways that we've kind of thought of. You can, develop some coping skills, and we've got lots of them. If you're interested, let us know. We can send you a list of 1 million of them. You can Google coping skills and come up with a bazillion of them, but it won't work unless you're willing to take that first step, and getting in touch with the emotions, especially the anxiety we're talking about, the depression, all those kind of things. You've got to be aware of what it is. It was interesting. I remember one time years ago, I was working with a client, and we'd had him for so long that I'm like, and it was probably about a good 6 months into, him coming, him leaving, coming back, leaving, coming back, where I'm like, dude, this is bipolar.
Yeah.
And when we peeled back that layer and started showing, I'm like, look at my notes with you, depressed, super energetic, depressed and sad, lethargic, motivated. We started seeing this, and it was like, okay, now that you understand this, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
And it was kind of an interesting thing because he's like, wait a second. And he took that by the reins and really
did great. But I'm sure at first it was like, no, I know people that are bipolar and I'm not as extreme, or we try to compare, but not everyone's the same. Everyone shows some of those symptoms differently.
His resilience came from his development of understanding what it is. And it's not a doomsday sentence.
No.
It's okay, I get this. So when I'm low, people need to know that, like, hey, it's going to take me a little bit longer to get things going. When I'm manic, hey, I got to set some boundaries for myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so really getting to know yourself inside and out. That's why I love the way The Peaceful Warrior with Dan Millman is, because he says, there's a point where Dan's talking to his mentor. He calls him Socrates. And Socrates kind of makes this little wince, like it's a small little, like, and Dan's all, what was that? And he's like, I think it might be getting a kidney infection. And he's like, what? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm in tune with my body. I know when I feel something, even if it's so slight, right? I mean, we're all experiencing stuff right now. Or even right now, as you're listening to this, right now, the way I'm sitting, my back is kind of getting sore. It's kind of a funny, stupid thing. So do I just ignore it and keep going? Or should I shift my position, right?
Yeah.
So what Socrates was trying to teach Dan is that how in tune can you be with yourself? Now, I know Max over here. Max is very in tune with himself. We were talking about these things that come down from Vernal. And Max is like, I know when I take a Tylenol or something, I can feel it. I'm like, dude, what?
Physical awareness.
Because he's that in tune with how things work. And so a lot of us don't do that. So we have heartburn, we have gastrointestinal problems, we have headaches, and we think, well, I'll just take a pill and get rid of it. There's a problem.
Or you don't recognize it until it's so bad because you're too chaotic and busy worrying and thinking about other things that you don't notice some of the littler signs.
We call that emotional masking, where you kind of like put on one face when you're really feeling another. You've got to be willing to take that off and expose what's really going on, because you yourself can even fall victim to being a very good mask wearer and I guess forget who you are authentically.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I hope this has helped a little bit as we're kind of talking about these emotions, the stability behind it, how to do some coping skills. If you want help with that, maybe you're kind of stuck, you can reach out to us. Coach Blue, I'm here at Homebase, Addict to Athlete. But you can get a hold of me at addicttoathlete.org. You can get a hold of Marissa, Marissa at addicttoathlete.org.
Yep.
Counseling, therapy services are available. But also, yeah, our resources on addicttoathlete.org. It's tons of like, backlog podcasts, information for understanding addiction, lots of neat things on there.
Absolutely.
So also, I guess while we're talking about the website, there's also a really cool store. And if you get in there soon, because I'm probably changing the platform on where we're getting our stuff, because
we may be changing.
we may be changing that, because my gosh, talk about snail mail. But jump on and look at our team store. There's a lot of stuff there. And we have stuff here at the Homebase location. If you want to come in and do a little Christmas shopping, we're able to accomplish.
You can let me know and I can ship stuff too.
We can send it to you. Nonetheless, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so happy to have you all here and to share this. This is going to be a podcast, like I said, that will come out tomorrow. But for you who are listening to it next week, don't worry about that, right?
Yeah.
But you'll have this ready when you have some anxiety. Maybe re-listen to this podcast, share it with anyone that may be struggling with it. And athletes, as always, until next time, please continue to turn that mess of addiction into the message of your sobriety.